Welcome back to another video of Rugged West Stories. Tonight's tale is unlike anything you've ever heard before. Imagine a poor rancher so desperate that he marries a stranger just for a single cow. But on their wedding night, she locks the door. And what happens next will shock you. Stay tuned, because this story will take you deep into the heart of the Wild West, where hunger, pride, and mystery collide in ways no one could have predicted. Eli Turner was a poor rancher on the edge of nowhere. His land was dry, his fences broken, and his cattle herd, once his father's pride, had dwindled down to a single half-blind steer. The desert wind rattled the shingles of his shack, and every night Eli stared into the empty pantry, wondering how many more days he could survive. He wasn't lazy. He worked from dawn to dusk, plowing soil that gave nothing back, patching water troughs that stayed empty, and fixing saddles that no horse had worn in months. The truth was simple. Life had beaten him down. Neighbors whispered that Eli Turner wouldn't last through the season. Some even bet he'd abandon his land and vanish like so many broke cowhands before him. But Eli wasn't a quitter. His father's grave was on that land, and pride chained him to it. He only needed one break, one chance. That chance came in the strangest form imaginable. It was market day in the dusty town of Calico. Eli had come only to buy salt, though he could barely afford even that. As he walked past the corral, he saw a sight that stopped him cold. A woman standing beside a wagon, tall and broad, with her arms crossed and a scowl that could scare off a rattlesnake. She wasn't pretty in the polished sense, but there was something fierce, almost commanding about her presence. Beside her, tied to the wagon, stood a sturdy milk cow. Fat, healthy, and worth more than Eli's entire ranch. A few men were gathered around, laughing. "Selling the cow, missy?" one asked. The woman's voice carried like thunder. "I'm not selling her. I'm trading. I need a husband." The laughter doubled. A husband? For a cow? Eli froze. Surely he had misheard. But the woman stood firm. "I'll marry the man who'll give me a roof and a place to belong. In return, I bring this cow," the crowd jeered. Men muttered about her size, called her names. But Eli didn't laugh. His heart pounded. That cow meant milk, calves, survival. Without it, his ranch was finished. He swallowed hard and stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "I don't have much. But I've got a roof. And I could use that cow," the men hooted, slapping their knees. But the woman studied him with dark, piercing eyes. After a long silence, she said, "Name's Martha. If you're serious, rancher, then you and I have a deal." By sunset, the town preacher had them married in the dusty street. The men from the saloon poured out to watch, still laughing, but Eli ignored them. He led Martha and the cow back to his ranch, wondering what kind of storm he had just brought into his life. That night, the shack was quiet. Eli laid out an extra blanket on the bed and said, half awkward, "Well, Mrs. Turner, this here's home." "Ain't much, but it's honest." Martha didn't smile. She stood in the doorway of the small bedroom, her shadow stretching across the wooden floor. Without a word, she walked inside, turned the key in the lock, and shut him out. Eli stood there stunned. The lamp flickered. His new wife had just locked the door on their wedding night, and for the first time in years, Eli felt a chill run through his bones that had nothing to do with the cold desert wind. Eli Turner didn't sleep that night. He sat on the creaky chair by the kitchen table, listening to the silence of his own house, broken only by the faint sound of Martha moving behind the locked bedroom door. Every now and then the boards groaned under her heavy steps, and then nothing. He rubbed his temples. "What in God's name have I done?" he muttered. The cow mooed softly outside the window as if mocking him. He had gotten what he wanted, a cow, a lifeline for the ranch, but the cost was higher than he could measure. At dawn, the door finally opened. Martha stepped out wearing the same heavy dress as before. Her hair was braided tightly, her face stern. She didn't speak. Instead, she carried a bucket to the well, filled it, and began milking the cow. Her arms worked strong and sure, as if she had done this her whole life. Eli walked out onto the porch, squinting into the rising sun. "Morning," he tried. She didn't answer. By noon, she had cleaned the kitchen, chopped wood, and swept the floorboards so thoroughly that the shack seemed almost new. Eli watched her in silence. There was something unsettling about the way she moved, with purpose but without a word. Finally, he asked, So, why me? Out of all them men in town, why'd you pick me? Martha looked up at him, and for the first time her dark eyes softened. Because you didn't laugh, she said simply. Eli felt his chest tighten. He hadn't thought of it that way. The men in town had mocked her like she was some sideshow, but he had seen the cow, seen the deal, and spoken plain. She had noticed. Still, the locked door gnawed at him. That night he laid out his blanket by the fireplace again. He heard her footsteps, heard the door close, heard the key turn in the lock. Days passed like this. She worked hard, harder than Eli himself at times. The ranch started to change. The cow gave milk. Martha planted a small garden behind the house, something Eli had never had the patience for. She patched his torn shirts with steady hands. Slowly his land, once barren and broken, began to breathe again. But still, every night the door locked, and Eli's patience wore thin. One evening, after a long day of mending fences together, Eli finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, but there was steel in it. "Martha," he said, standing in the doorway as she stoked the fire, "this ain't right. You're my wife now, but you shut me out like a stranger. I need to know why." The room went silent except for the crackle of firewood. Martha's hands froze on the poker. Slowly she turned. Her face was pale, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "You want to know why?" she whispered. Eli nodded. She set the poker aside, stood tall, and faced him. "Because men are not safe at night," she said. Eli's brow furrowed. "What the hell does that mean?" Her jaw tightened. She took a step closer, her shadow towering over him. "It means I've seen what men do when doors are unlocked. I've lived it. And I swore I'd never let it happen again." The words hung heavy in the air. Eli opened his mouth to speak. But before he could, a sound echoed across the barren land. The distant thunder of hooves. He rushed to the porch. Dust clouds rose on the horizon, growing larger. Riders. A dozen at least, maybe more, heading straight for his ranch. Martha stood behind him, her face grim. She didn't flinch, didn't gasp. Instead, she whispered something under her breath. Words Eli couldn't catch. When he turned to her, her eyes were darker than he'd ever seen. "Eli," she said slowly, "they found me." The riders came closer, and Eli realized this was no ordinary wife. This was no ordinary marriage. And by the time the horses stopped in his yard, the poor rancher knew his life had changed forever. The dust settled in the yard as the riders pulled up their reins. Horses snorted, hooves struck dirt, and Eli's small ranch suddenly felt like the center of the world. There were 12 of them, hard men with rifles slung across their backs, revolvers at their hips and eyes that burned like cold iron. Their leader, a scar-faced brute with a black hat and a coat that looked stolen off a dead soldier, dismounted first. Eli gripped the post on the porch, his stomach tightening. "What do you want here?" he called, trying to sound braver than he felt. The scarred man spat into the dirt. "We're looking for a woman," he said. His eyes flicked toward the doorway where Martha stood, her shoulders broad, her face like carved stone. Eli's pulse quickened. He stepped down from the porch, putting himself between the men and his wife. "Ain't no woman here but mine," he said firmly. The men chuckled darkly. Their leader tilted his head. "Yours, huh? That so?" He glanced back at Martha and gave a sharp grin. "Well, if that's your wife, rancher, then I reckon you don't know who you're married to." Eli's jaw clenched. He could feel Martha's silence behind him, heavy like the desert heat. "She's mine. And you're trespassing." The leader laughed, a rough, ugly sound. Bold words for a man with one cow and a shack about ready to fall. He stepped closer. "That woman you call your wife? She stole from us. She ran from us. What's ours we take back." The men shifted in their saddles, hands drifting toward holsters. Eli's heart pounded. He wanted to turn around, demand the truth from Martha right there, but he couldn't show weakness. Not in front of these men. Then, for the first time, Martha stepped forward. Her voice cut through the yard like a blade. "You don't own me," she said. The scarred man sneered. "You think so? Tell him, Martha. Tell your sweet little husband who you really are." Eli looked at her, searching her face. She didn't blink. "My name isn't Martha," she said quietly. "It's Margaret O'Connell. And before I came here, I was the woman who burned their camp to the ground." The words hit Eli like a hammer. He turned to the riders. Their eyes burned hotter now, hands itching to draw iron. "You killed our men," the leader growled. "You think we'd forget?" Margaret's gaze didn't waver. "I killed them because they deserved it. Because they weren't men at all. They were monsters." The scarred man's face twisted with rage. "You'll pay for that tonight." His hand dropped to his pistol. Eli's instincts screamed. He drew his own revolver in a flash, the weight of it cold and certain in his palm. The men stiffened, fingers hovering. "Over triggers, back away," Eli said, his voice steady now. "You heard the lady. She's mine. And if you try to take her, you'll have to go through me first." The yard went still. The only sound was the restless shifting of horses, the faint groan of leather saddles. Then the scarred man grinned, slow and cruel. "Fine, rancher. Keep her for tonight. But tomorrow we come back with more. We'll burn this shack to ash and hang you both from the rafters." He mounted his horse, spat again, and signaled the others. Dust rose as they turned and rode away, their threat hanging heavier than the smoke of a campfire. Eli lowered his gun but didn't holster it. He turned to Margaret, Martha, whatever her name was. His voice cracked with confusion and anger. "You gonna explain?" he demanded. "Right now." Margaret stepped closer, her face pale. Her eyes wet with something Eli hadn't seen before. "Fear. I locked that door at night," she said, her voice trembling now. "Because I didn't want you to see the truth. Because I thought if I stayed silent, maybe I could build a new life here. But Eli, you've married a woman who carries blood on her hands. And now, because of me, death is coming to your door." The firelight from the house flickered across her face. For the first time, Eli didn't see a stranger or even just a wife. He saw a secret war, a woman hiding from a past darker than he could imagine. He sheathed his revolver and looked at the horizon where the riders had vanished. "Then I guess," he said grimly, "we'll fight death together." And as the desert night swallowed the ranch, Eli realized he had made a bargain far greater than a cow. He had married into a war. The desert was restless that night. The wind howled low, carrying with it the smell of dust and distant smoke. Eli sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, staring into the darkness. Inside, Margaret, the woman he had called Martha until this very evening, sat silently by the fire, her eyes fixed on the flames as if they could erase her past. Neither spoke. Words seemed small compared to the storm that was about to hit them. At dawn, Eli was the first to hear it. The rumble of hooves, deep and thunderous, like a storm rolling across the plains. He stood and gripped his rifle tighter. Margaret stepped out beside him, her face pale but her jaw set like stone. On the horizon, dust clouds rose. Not 12 this time. Dozens. An army of riders, their silhouettes cutting sharp against the rising sun. The scarred leader rode at the front, his black coat flapping, his face twisted in a grim smile. "They've brought half their gang," Eli muttered. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "More than half. They won't stop until I'm dead." Eli looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time as more than a burden or a stranger. He saw the steel in her, the courage, the pain she carried. She wasn't just a woman who had locked a door. She was a survivor of something far worse. "You ready to stand with me?" he asked. She met his gaze. "I was born ready." The riders thundered into the yard, circling the shack like wolves around a wounded animal. Their laughter echoed, cruel and sharp. The scarred leader dismounted, his boots crunching on dry earth. "Morning, rancher," he called, his voice oily with menace. "Hope you said your prayers. This'll be your last sunrise." Eli raised his rifle. "You're standing on my land. You come for her, you come for me too," the man grinned. "Then both of you can meet your maker together." With a wave of his hand, the attack began. Gunfire cracked through the morning air. Windows shattered. Dust and smoke exploded around them. Eli fired back, each shot deliberate, precise. 2 riders dropped before they could even clear their pistols. Margaret grabbed his spare revolver and stood by his side, her hands steady, her aim deadly. She was no helpless bride. She fought like someone who had bled before. The gang pressed harder, circling, firing from horseback. Bullets tore through the walls of the shack. Eli and Margaret ducked, firing through the broken window frames. Every shot a gamble, every breath stolen from death's grasp. "On your left," Margaret shouted, dropping a rider who had tried to flank them. Eli's rifle cracked again, the scarred man's hat flying from his head as a bullet missed by inches. The leader roared in rage, charging forward with 2 pistols blazing. Time slowed. Eli aimed, but his rifle clicked empty. The scarred man grinned. "Now you're mine!" Before Eli could move, Margaret stepped into the doorway. Her revolver barked once, twice. The scarred man staggered, shock etched on his face before collapsing into the dust. Silence fell over the yard. The riders froze, staring at their fallen leader. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then, without a word, the gang turned their horses and rode away, leaving the scarred man's body sprawled in the dirt. The ranch was quiet again, except for the wind. Eli lowered his empty rifle and looked at Margaret. Her chest heaved, her face streaked with sweat and dust, but her eyes were fierce. For the first time, she looked free. He stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You locked that door because of men like him," he said softly. "But you don't have to lock it anymore. Not with me." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. "And you don't have to face hunger and loneliness anymore, Eli Turner. Not with me." The cow mooed in the distance, almost comical after the storm of gunfire. For the first time in years, Eli laughed. A rough, tired laugh, but a real one. They buried the scarred man at the edge of the land. No prayers, no words. Just dust to dust. That night, for the first time since their wedding, the door to the bedroom stayed open. The lamp glowed softly, casting warm light across the room. No locks, no fear. Only the strange, hard-won bond of 2 souls who had survived a war together. Eli had married for a cow. What he found was something far greater. A partner who could face down death and stand unbroken at his side. And as the desert wind whispered through the night, the poor rancher knew his life would never be lonely again.